Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, a nature and wildlife photographer based in Northern California. And today we're doing a walk and talk because I got to walk back to my car after an amazing morning doing some bird photography with the Sony A1 and the 400mm f2.8. So look, I kind of want to just talk about this camera body, the Sony A1. It's the first time I've personally shot it. I have an A7R5, which is a landscape camera I use for portraiture as well. I've shot this Nikon Z8, the Canon R5. I shot the Nikon D850 before that. So I have a fair amount of experience shooting these various camera bodies for the past 20 years of my life. Now, look, I'm just gonna get the elephant out of the room. I am blown away by the Sony A1. It's the autofocus that's just crazy to me. I think a lot of people talk about this. I've certainly heard about it, but until you experience it yourself, knowing your own skill set, knowing your own capabilities, it's kind of hard to parse all the verbiage and all the writing out there. And I realize the irony of me doing a talking head video talking about this stuff to you, given that comment, but let's just let that be for a second. So the Z8 is great, and I've shot the Z8 with the 600mm PF and the 400mm f4.5. It's an amazing camera. It's got a great sensor. The colors are fantastic. The grip and the body is fantastic. I love the way it feels in the hand. And the autofocus has gotten really good with all the updates. However, the Sony A1, in my experience, is just opening up forms of photography that are fun to photograph, like birds in flight, and making it a painless experience compared to even the Nikon Z8. With the Nikon, even with the 600mm PF, which is a gold ring lens, really good lens, I find that the autofocus is like not that consistent. Like you'll get a shot, you'll get the one you want, you'll get a shot, you'll get a sharp shot. It may not be the one you want. It may be that the one you wanted was slightly out of focus. The shots kind of pulse a little bit in and out of focus. It's like uncertain. Like the camera doesn't really know what it wants to focus on, so it's going to give you a couple different options of perfect tack sharpness. The Sony A1, in contrast, just locks on and nails it. It just doesn't quit. It's so good for birds in flight. Like it just acquires the subject and holds it, and every single shot in the series is sharp, and it's just awesome. And even coming from the A7R5, which is a more recent, it's a current version of the Sony ecosystem, but with the R series. Even that camera, it's a great camera, and the autofocus is great. It has that AI chip and all that crap. But at the end of the day, the shutter shock on that thing means that it vibrates a little bit, and every other shot or every third shot is a little blurry in comparison to the one before it. And you can't shoot electronic shutter because it's such a slow readout speed that anything that isn't just a tripod landscape is no good. And that's not what the camera's designed for, so don't get on my case about that. I get that. But at the same time, I'm just saying the A1 is such a step up from the A7R5 if what you're shooting is action and you want to use an electronic shutter. So it's got the sharpness and the clarity of the Nikon files because it doesn't have an AA filter, an anti-aliasing filter. It's got a phenomenal autofocus system, even maybe dated and not as like current as the new version of the A1 II. It's just so freaking good. And I'm kind of just blown away by the experience I've had over the past week, with this system. And I don't know, I just feel like a shill, man. I feel like a Sony, the light's terrible. I just feel like a hack, saying this to you on the internet, that how good this is. But it's honest. Like it is just outstandingly sharp, in focus, and great image quality. So I don't know what to say, man. It's just a great camera, and I've had a joy using it over the past week. And, you know, I'm hopeful that there's an A1 in my future, basically. I'm at this point now where I've got a pretty clear path for where I want to go with my equipment, but I'm really needing that low light capability that I'm not getting with the 6.3 aperture on the Nikon 600mm PF. I think that lens is great. It just isn't delivering with low light. And so because of that, I'm jumping back in to the big glass world that I left. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and you know, leaving the 500 f4 that I used to shoot and the 300 f2.8 before that, yes, you have the weight of those lenses, and going to the 600mm PF was a great decision from a weight perspective. But because I shoot a lot at sunrise and sunset, because that's just a phenomenal time to get out and photograph owls and other birds, it's a little problematic, to say the least, to have that f6.3 aperture. And so as a result, I'm looking to figure out what my path is to get a larger aperture lens glass, that, you know, aperture lens that will serve that purpose of doing the low light shooting with maximum image quality. So all that's to say, because I'm kind of looking, and that's going to be the most expensive lens in my arsenal, I do have the ability here to buy a used 600mm f4 with Sony, or a used, you know, 600mm f4 with another brand. So that's partly why I'm looking right now at the Sony system. And thankful to Sony, because I'm part of the professional services there, for lending me this gear and allowing me to explore and see kind of what the right fit is for me. The 400mm is not, and I'll have a separate video on that. That is not enough focal length, and it's not sharp enough with the teleconverters to use the teleconverters all the time. So I think a 600 f4 is the right move for me personally. I don't think that's a big surprise. I think anyone who's into bird photography will tell you that the holy grail lens for all of us is probably a 600 f4. So it's not a big surprise here, but I do find myself finally accepting that reality. But anyway, back to the Sony A1. So it's, yes, the image quality, yes, the autofocus is outstanding. And then there's like little features here and there. Like, I really like having blinkies, or having the zebras, actually not blinkies, but having the zebras in the photo, not video, but in photo, settings. It's really great. In fact, I'm using that approach more than exposure compensation, and I'm finding that I'm not underexposing images as much as I used to. It's a little more work in the field. It's a true manual process where you're shooting, you know, ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. But because of the control layout and that wheel on the back of the camera, it's possible to do this in a way that's pretty quick in the field, and you don't miss many shots. But those that you do get are super well exposed and require very little editing. Other things I'm enjoying about the camera, I like that it's small in the hand, and the control layout's really good. I would say it is not ergonomically, in my hand, as nice as the Nikon Z8. The Z8 is way better from an ergonomic perspective. I love the way that feels. The materials, I just compared it yesterday, the grips. It's, yes, the physical layout of the grip, but also just the materials that they use, how those materials age and wear over time. The Sony is a bit more of a hard plastic feel. The Nikon has this like rubberized kind of feel to it. And it's just a nicer body, in my opinion. I don't mind that it's 0.4 pounds heavier than the A1. The Z8 is just a better body for my hands, and for what I attribute, you know, what I think is a good build quality. The other thing that is kind of a little bit annoying I find about this is I don't like the screen. You know, everyone I think talks about that. You know, whether or not the A1 II is a worthwhile upgrade, really, when it's primarily about the screen. There was a scenario just this morning when I was photographing a snowy egret that was like really close to the camera. It was just perfect conditions for unleashing the full potential of the 400 f2.8, just like perfect conditions for that, and distance, full frame. But because I had to shoot vertical because it was so close, I wasn't able to pop the screen out because the screen only pops out when you're shooting landscape. That is a problem. It's annoying. It happens occasionally. It's not often, but when it does happen, it is frustrating. Is that worth whatever $2,500 difference between a used Sony A1 and an A1 II? Probably not, in my opinion, personally, but you know, you be the judge if you care about it. But for me personally, I was like, I don't know. And that's kind of exciting because that means it's a bit of a swap from the Z8 to the A1 if I want to go that route, if I'm buying used. They're basically the same value, give or take a couple $100. So I don't love that about the screen. And then the screen quality in general is not very good. It's low resolution. The viewfinder is great. I shoot most of it and I review most of my images in the viewfinder anyway, so it's not actually that big a deal for me. But on the other hand, you know, having a bad screen on your camera is kind of a pain in the butt, especially when it's a flagship. But other than that, really, those two things, I find very few faults in the Sony A1, and I am a little bit surprised because I didn't want to like this camera as much as I do, but it is pretty clear for my needs that I'd rather have a Sony A1 in my bag than my current A7R5. Yeah, you lose 10 megapixels, 11 megapixels, but I don't think that's that big a deal. So it's been an interesting week of testing, and I've got a lot to think about. But it's certainly confirmed for me that if I'm going to a 600 millimeter f4, I ought to be looking at Sony's as well as other used versions, Canon and Nikon as well, because the A1 paired with a 600 f4 could be the best birding setup for me personally, especially when you constrain it a little bit with costs, because I don't have $20,000 to spend on equipment. So thank you for watching if you did watch, and if you didn't watch, I hope you watched something better. So I'll take care, and I'll see you outside next video, and be well. Peace.